Please smash the like button and, of course, subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. Join Pat on Bucknuts 247 Sports. Okay, offensive line. Doesn't seem like there's a ton of questions in terms of personnel. It's more like these guys just need to play better.
Yeah, I think the big one, well, I think there's two things that you probably question. Who's going to be the starting center? Because you had Carson Hinsman start all of last season until the bowl game. Still kind of questions about why he wasn't playing in that game. Ohio State goes out and brings in Seth McLaughlin from Alabama, who obviously had some snapping issues last season, but the season before he did really well. His blocking grades are really good. The expectation, from my understanding, was that Seth McLaughlin would be playing at center. But again, we go out on the first 2 days of spring practice. It's Carson Hinsman as the number one center working with the first team offensive line. Early days, obviously. And then the other question for the offensive line is, how do you fill that right guard hole that was vacated when Matthew Jones left early on? They've kept Josh Fryer at right tackle. Some thought was that they may move him to right guard. And Luke Montgomery, the second-year player, was lined up at that right guard position, so that seems to be the way that the line is. And on the left side, you've got Donovan Jackson and Josh Simmons returning. So that seems to be the way the line is shaping up, at least here early in practice. To your point, Mark, that's a lot of the same guys that played last year and underperformed, I would say, from an Ohio State standard. They got better as the season progressed, but just as a collective, like I said earlier, this was the biggest concern for me going into last season. I feel like I'm still talking about a lot of the same things going into this next season. I do believe in development and the fact, especially as an offensive lineman, and how important that can be. Josh Simmons arrived at Ohio State in June after transferring from San Diego State. He didn't get a full off season. So how much of a jump can he make at left tackle, being in the strength program, going through spring practice? Does Josh Fryer at right tackle, or even if he moves to right guard, that year of starting, kind of learning from his mistakes, can he take that and make it, make that next jump? So I think there are ways to see this offensive line improving, but, honestly, I don't think we're going to know until we see them face a, matchup, quote unquote, opponent next season. Because look, they looked good in some games early on, non-conference games and things like that. But, there were just too many times when they couldn't get the job done. Kyle McCord's under pressure. The holes aren't opening for running backs, things like that. And, Ohio State was still able to win 11 games, but the Buckeyes obviously have bigger goals, and the offensive line is going to be so key for this offense to have success.
Well, I certainly wasn't surprised at one point in the season when I saw that Josh Simmons had more penalties than any player in the country, because I was always thinking that every game, this guy gets a penalty like every drive. And that even extended to his days at San Diego State. So yeah. He played much better down the stretch. He got better, was arguably the best lineman, but obviously that's a point of emphasis for him to clean up a little bit. It just seems to be the obvious place that regardless of how well they play in the spring, that would be where this team would go in the transfer portal.
Yes, and that's still probably an option. I think the Buckeyes were interested in some guys early on in the first window. Now they get the chance to see how these guys come along in spring practice, and you have the opportunity to add again. Again, I feel like I'm talking about last year, because this was the same conversation we were having that ultimately led to Josh Simmons joining the team. I think it'll depend, obviously, what happens, who enters the transfer portal, how these guys develop. But certainly if there is one position that you think there might still be an addition at, I think it's on the offensive line and frankly, probably one of the tackle positions.
Pat Murphy, Bucknuts 247 Sports. We always appreciate Pat stopping by, breaking down Ohio State football. Of course, a week in spring practice. They took a week off for spring break. They're back at it here coming up in the next few days, and join Pat and his work there at bucknuts.com. Pat, appreciate you stopping by, breaking things down for us.
Absolutely, Mark. Anytime.